Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Voices with Vervaeke. I'm here with my good friend Kyle Koch. As some of you know, because he's been on my channel before, I met Kyle at Rafe Kelly's Return to the Source. He was one of the instructors, facilitators. I came to deeply appreciate Kyle and was very impressed by him. We formed a bond. We've maintained that. He reached out to me recently, and we've had a couple of offline conversations. He has been doing something really important. He has been practicing dialogical practices, dialectic into dialogos, within a natural setting, within real campfires. People seated around a campfire, really naturally embedded and socially co-present. And he wants to tell us about the effects of situating these dialogical practices into and embedding them within a proper socially present and naturally present context. Welcome, Kyle. It's great to have you back again.
Yeah, thank you, John. Oh, it's so good to see your face and hear your voice. I'm really, happy, a little nervous and excited to, kind of dive in and hopefully expand my level of understanding and really kind of like get this opportunity to dig into how you see these things and how I see them and where is this like convergence.
That's excellent. Maybe just in case people haven't seen a previous video, tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background, your interest in my work, and then we'll dive into the topic at hand.
Yeah, the really short story is once upon a time, I was a IT technician working in a major metropolitan city, navigating software problems, which we had to this morning. This was kind of funny. Yes. And yeah, feeling this like lack of belonging, this lack of connection, this uncertainty in my life, I ended up quitting my job and embarking on a 9-month immersion at the Wilderness Awareness School and really finding like deep connection and belonging in myself and in the natural world and realizing through that connection, I'm like a deep well of hidden potential. And as I've like been on that journey, I also felt like lost. I'm like, man, like, how come other people, like I get this like feedback, like, Kyle, you're so like happy and alive and like what happened to you? I'm like, I don't know. Like I just spend a lot of time in nature and I do like things like that. And I was kind of like confused because I was also trying to figure out how to bring this and bridge this gap. Like, how do I do this for others? And there was like this disconnection. And when I found Awakening from the Meaning Crisis in like 2019, I would listen to an episode and I would go on a walk and I would come back and I would like tell my roommates, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I feel seen, I feel understood, like my experience in the world like now has language. And then bringing that language and John's models into our work at Evolve, Move, Play and like really realizing like what we're doing is like really important in really profound ways, even though like on the outside, it looks like frivolous play or like people just like hanging out in the woods. But my experience and the experience of those that come to these retreats is like, this is like really profound. And I'm still on this like search to like really understand that. And that's why I keep coming back to John, who like gave me this language. And I'm like, okay, I've shined a light into another corner. Like, is this it? Is this what's happening? And trying to, I really appreciate your bridging of the worlds of like, we can take things into a scientific mindset and get like a deeper understanding of these like phenomenological experiences. And then we can kind of put those into dialogue. Like this is happening, or well, we can actually measure some of that. This is still unknown, but we can keep moving forward in a way that gives people something to grasp onto and to kind of be like pulled deeper in, where they might be able to kind of like logic their way into like not understanding. They're like, well, there's no evidence for it. Like it's hippie bullshit, let's move on.
Right. Thank you. That's great. And Return to the Source was one of the most profound experiences of my life. Kyle has recently, I said, spoken to me. He's been running a sort of more specific, let's say, called retreat, focusing on embedding in a natural setting. And again, I say like in this evolutionary context, and there's something in there that I want to talk about, putting things back into sort of, that very ancient context of around the campfire. So tell us a little bit more about that. You talked to me, and you actually talked to me and Christopher Master Pietro, where you ran some of these practices in the naturally embedded situation. So what was going on? How many people are involved? What did you do specifically? And then most importantly, what was happening? What did people report? What did you see, etc.?
Yeah, before we dive in, I'm wondering if you can define embedded or embeddedness, just so we have like a shared understanding of how we're using that word.
Yeah, so the four E's I sometimes say six because I want to include emotional and exapted, which brings in that evolutionary perspective. But we have embodied, and of course, there's a lot about embodiment we'll probably touch on here. Enacted, you have to, your cognition is done mostly in action, sensory motor interaction, not just in your head. Embedded means that it's better to say your mind is between you and the world than within you. And it's transjective. It's about being dynamically coupled. So you can put the embodied as saying there's non-propositional knowing, procedural, perspectival, participatory. And when you get into those, you realize how embedded they are. They're about a dynamical coupling between the organism and the environment. You see this in biology and ideas of niche construction, where the organism is shaping the environment, but the environment is shaping the organism. And so they are embedded, they belong together, they fit together. That's what I would mean by embeddedness.
Nice. Yeah, I like that dynamic coupling. And then something you said like has been like really present for me. I think you said, we're shaping the environment and the environment is shaping us. And I really want to dive into that because I think the perspective is that we are shaping our environment, but I don't think we really understand how much the environment is shaping us.
Yes.
And that touches on your idea of this like evolution of evolvability, I think.
Yes.
And so that's where I'm like really in this curiosity. So I participated in these dialogical and these circling type practices. I kind of just have been heading them under deep listening. So that's how I'm going to frame it, as like, these are deep listening practices, for being in more relationship with other people. And so I brought these to my friends. I'm living in a community on this lake this past winter. And, I was like, my friend was struggling with something and he's like, I want to talk about this. I'm like, okay, well, I know about these deep listening practices that can give us a framework for exploring these things. And so we did it. We have this like really beautiful outdoor building that's a covered space with these wood benches. Everything was like handmade. And then we have a central fire, and we always start that fire in like, I'm struggling with the word primitive because it like assumes this like poor technological like positioning, but like it's
Paleolithic.
Like,
you did it in a Paleolithic manner. Yeah.
So we created this fire, a friction fire, using sticks and energy and attention and awareness. And that's how we start the fire in this place. And there's something about these layers of coming together, these like thresholds, that keep dropping us into the experience. So you arrive in a space. Okay, now we're singing to bring this fire to life. And then the fire happens. Whew. And then we're slowly dropping into these practices. And I found that like people's attention and people's energy, like not just being present, but there's something that draws about a fire.
Yeah.
There's like, I was joking with my friend. It's like, if you're like two people and you're just like sitting on the porch at night, it's like kind of weird. But if there's a fire there, you could sit there for hours and hours and hours. It's like this, it's like a glue in a way. It's a mutual connector of all the people in the space. And I think it's like adding its own energy and kind of entity and, witnessing as well. And so people were exploring these practices, and we were able to like go really deep and like be with emotions, and a lot of profound things came up and moved. And then like, okay, like there's something here. And then we had another experience in which like one of our elders came in, and we were holding a space for another community member who was also struggling with something. And he actually like, we set the space a little bit more. So we cleared everything out of the space. We smudged the space, and then we entered in a very specific way. And we, again, these like layers of dropping into the experience. And then we were having this experience where like the fire again, like keeps everybody present. It like keeps you from getting distracted. Like I've noticed when I've done these on Zoom calls, I like might get a notification, or there's something like my roommate comes in, there's something happening in the background. I'm being pulled out, and it's like, it's hard to pull myself in. And so in this experience, we were exploring story and emotion, these kind of like IFS parts of ourself.
Oh, you did some
all
IFS.
these like,
yeah.
all these layers, right? That I've heard you talk about, like, and then the thing that was missing was the deep listening skills. And so we were like, without the specific deep listening skills and kind of like framework, we were still able to drop in and arrive at a similar space, that like midwifing of like a new possibility, a new way of being. And I was like, oh, like if these people had these deep listening skills, like, oh, this would be so amazing. And then I was like, if the people that have the deep listening skills, if they were like dropped into this space, like what is possible?
Yeah.
And we got to taste that a little bit at, when you came to Return to the Source, and subsequently since then with Jake coming and helping facilitate those experiences for us. I'm like, oh man, like there's something there. There's something about being in a specific environment. And then I'm like, that's the like question I'm holding. Like, what is the impact of our environment on our cognition?
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot there, and I wasn't distracted. I was taking notes, which actually helped me keep track of things very carefully, because I don't want to lose any of these important threads. So let's first start with the just the campfire itself. Matt Rossano, who has a new book out, Ritual in Human Evolution and Religion, and his previous book, Supernatural Selection, and in some of his essays, he talks about the campfire, and that what you get is you get people focused on a continually moving, and this is the right way to say it, I mean this literally, a hypnotic stimulus. And hypnotism is a way of inducing, this is other work that people have done, the hypnotic state is a good state for inducing mindfulness. If people are in hypnosis, they can readily fall into a state of intense mindfulness, especially if they're properly primed to do that. And Matt Rossano actually argues that the campfire and that ability help to sort of exact and then make available for evolution our capacity for hypnosis, and then which enhances the placebo effect. So that's going to be important. And that enhances also our ability to mindfulness, which enhances our metacognitive abilities, which would also be important. So the campfire has probably been playing a big role in, what's the name of that effect? It starts with a B. I'm very close with it. It's an effect in evolution where you get something that's an innovation, but it becomes pervasive in the environment, and then it puts selective pressure, and then you start to get genetic evolution to tailor people to the environment. Oh, and I can't quite. It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyways,
it's not a psychotechnology.
No. There's a specific name from evolutionary theory for an effect where you initially it's something that people do. It's a learned behavior. So it's typically used for language. Language probably was initially a learned behavior, but it becomes very pervasive in the social environment, and then it starts to put evolutionary pressure, and you actually get biological genetic changes to make people more and more predisposed to learning language. And you get the same kind of effect, Rosanna was arguing, with the campfire. And so that in and of itself means we're plugging into something that we're probably biologically disposed towards, getting us into these hypnotic states where we are open to suggestion and relaxing some of our constraints, and mindfulness in which we are put into a reflective state. Next thing, shared attention. So Tomasello and others have been arguing that a lot of our learning takes place, especially of language, through shared attention, joint attention. So you can see the whites of our eyes. This is an evolutionary thing. If you compare us to other primates, they don't have a lot of white. And the reason for that is they're trying to keep their view secret. But we gave up that, and we have eyes so that we can readily track each other, because joint attention allows us to engage in rapid social learning. This is Tomasello. And it's important for attachment, which goes deep into our psychological machinery. The joint attention, and Dan Chappie and I have published 3 papers on this about the NASA scientists moving the rovers around on Mars. The joint attention facilitates joint agency, creating a collective intelligence of distributed cognition that allows people to grok more abstract or more temporally and spatially distinct dimensions of their environment. And so people get the capacity through each other to sort of transcend their normal everyday framing. And of course, that's what was happening there. And then, of course, you've got all the work that on ritual, Matt Rossano's new book, all the work I've been doing. You're going in and you're doing ritual. You're doing shared imaginal enhancement of the ability to track otherwise very subtle patterns, sensory motor patterns, sociocultural patterns, and ritual is getting us all entrained in this way. And by having us interact with other people in this way, areas of the brain that aren't normally talking to each other start talking to each other as we take on multiple perspectives. And then you also get Michael Winkelmann's idea that ritual plugs the neuroaxial. You get the very high cognitive levels in trained with the very embodied somatic levels of the brain. And then that allows people to bond very deeply and can communicate at multiple levels at the same time. Metaphoric thought is enhanced by this different areas talking to each other. Basically, you really strongly prep each other. Then the next is you get in a natural setting, like you talk about, and that's plugging in. And this, you and Rafe have talked about this a lot. You plug people back into the evolutionary environment in which all of our adaptations actually evolved and for which they are well suited. They get to optimally grip the environment. You get intense connectedness. So all this enhanced social connectedness is conjoined to an enhanced environmental connectedness. And this gives people a profound sense of a capacity for insight and transformation between them and other people, within themselves, and between them and the environment. All of this enhances belonging and meaning in life, which are interrelated, and that gives you enhanced sense of meaning and sense of belonging. And because of the state you're in, the state of play, it's a play framing, a safety framing, with tremendous potential for flow, especially with the fire. You get the tremendous capacity for deep learning and especially non-propositional learning. So that meaning is being attached to insight, flow, and so people are actually getting some cultivation of wisdom with respect to how they're enhancing meaning. And so they're getting this profound realization. So, sorry, that was a lot, but
That's so
lot.
good, though. That's why I love talking to you, because I'm having these phenomenological experiences. I'm like, that's the experience that I'm having. And I'm like, how connected is this to like a shared reality? And that's the question that I'm really like asking, is how like repeatable, like, can I replicate this in a way kind of like your work? Like, can we drop people into an ecology of practices that reliably produces these kind of results to help solve the meaning crisis, to help people fall in love with the world again?
Yes. And so that's where I'm very excited about what you talked about, especially some of the work that Jake did, where he brought some of that ecology of practices into the natural setting, the campfire setting, the ritual setting. I think all three of those dimensions are really important. We got a ritual setting, we got a campfire setting, and we have a natural setting. I think all of those dimensions are really, really important. Even setting aside a specific space that you then sacralize by the smudging, all of this is priming effect for human beings. And we've evolved at least probably 200,000 years, uncontroversially, at least 50,000 years in this kind of environment. It was doing powerful things for us. We probably got our first capacity to intentionally alter our state of consciousness, shamanism, in that kind of milieu. I think the prospect of bringing a lot of the practices that we are doing online into in-person, in that dimension, all those dimensions you talk about, I think your intuition that this would be a powerful synergistic effect. The practices would really deepen those dimensions, and those dimensions of embeddedness would really deepen the practice. I think you'd get profound reciprocal opening. That's my prediction. It stands to, I think it's plausible. It makes good sense. And you and I and Chris are talking about the possibility that the VF might actually put together a retreat, perhaps in that location, the beautiful location where you are, and we would actually do this kind of combination. And you'd probably add in some of your ecology practices, some of your nature connection practices, things like that. But I'm very excited about this. I think this is a very plausible and powerful proposal. It's just a matter of we're trying to get our schedules to interconnect and trying to get resources. We have to marshal our resources very carefully at the VF, because we're putting a lot of the resources into the next series, the Philosophical Silk Road. But I think the possibility that your proposal will be powerful is definitely something we want to explore.
Yeah, and there's a couple things. So I think, like, one, what you said, like arriving in the space is really important, how we do that. And like I've noticed in myself, like sometimes how I arrive to these Zoom calls is like I could be doing a million other things and then like quickly like show up on my screen. Right. And then I think the other thing that is important, and one of the things I've been exploring, like why, like what else about ritual? Like what is it about these threshold moments? And I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but like my thinking is they actually like demarcate time. So it's like once a ritual happens, there's now a point in the timeline that you can be like, that happened, I'm different now. Right. And that's one of the things we do throughout these retreats. We have like these mini thresholds, because like in an experience, you like so many things happen. Time goes by so quickly. You're like, oh my goodness. Like you can't really delineate time from like this or that. And so I'm curious to just like hear like that, like reference point, like this thing happened both in the experience, so I can track the tracks of the experience, like these moments. And then that experience is also a bigger kind of like calendar moment.
Thank you for watching. This YouTube and podcast series is by the Vervaeke Foundation, which in addition to supporting my work, also offers courses, practices, workshops, and other projects dedicated to responding to the meaning crisis. If you would like to support this work, please consider joining our Patreon. You can find the link in the show notes. For a long time, Durkheim, Eliade have been talking about ritual creating sacred time and sacred space that is apart from mundane time and mundane space. And so that observation is, I think non-controversial. It's important, but it's not controversial. Now, more recently, and a little bit more speculatively, there's been a couple things. There's two things. The first, which we have a lot of evidence for, that are predictive of long-term change. And one is making use of reconstructive memory. The fact that memory is reconstructive. Memory is not a literal recording. Memory is doing anticipatory relevance realization. And I've been doing a lot of work about linking those together. Memory is about the future. It's not about the past. And it's about, and what memories do is they reconstruct, they reconfigure. And you can reconfigure, and they'll reconfigure in many powerful, often unconscious ways in order to improve your chance to foresee in a relevant, realizing manner the future. Now, we pay a deep price for that. Everything that makes us adaptive makes us self-deceptive, which is our memory accuracy goes down as we increase this adaptive foresight, insight into the future. So 49% of confident eyewitness testimony, it turns out to be false.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, that's why, writing things down and having multiple people and that this is very important. Now,
can I jump in on that?
Yeah, sure.
So, and that's what I've been also like working with. And I don't know if I've heard you say this directly, but I know you started with like the more senses we experience with something, like the more real that thing likely.
Oh, yeah. So that goes right into it.
So then when you're in a shared experience and that other person experiences that thing as well, you're basically experiencing it with all of their senses.
Yes.
And that witnessing that happens in that ritualistic space, the things you say have been witnessed, and now you can't deny the reality of that. And I think like that is like really powerful.
That's very important. So you get trustworthiness, which is you get a tremendous amount of converging independent evidence from all your senses. And you get a tremendous amount of converging evidence from all these perspectives. That raises the trustworthiness, the idea that what's happening is not just a subjective illusion; it's got reality in it. But because you're making a memory, because you've created sacred time and sacred space. In fact, there's a new theory out that's got a lot of merit to it, that the point of consciousness is actually to facilitate episodic memory for the future. So what we do with consciousness is we create a new kind of memory, episodic memory, that really plugs into our salience landscaping, but is tuning it for the future in a powerful way. So what I mean by that is you get all this trustworthiness coming in, like we just talked about, and then because you're tapping into because you're creating sacred time and sacred space, you're opening up the possibility of working with reconstructive episodic memory and really opening your ability to foresee a new kind of future. You talked about possibilities opening up, and these aren't vague possibilities. These are powerfully, like insightfully promising possibilities. So you have a lot of trustworthiness coming into an experience that now is promising a lot of transformation. And that makes this powerfully plausible, and it really triggers reconstructive memory to start transforming you. Now that is powerful. And that's a big part of what ritual is doing. Now, another thing, not as much evidence for this, but growing evidence for this. The other thing that predicts long-term aspirational change is internalizing a wise person, and internalizing a moral exemplar. But when we're in these situations, because we're so closely bonded, what we can actually internalize, and this is a Vervaekean proposal, is we can actually internalize the wise spirit of the group rather than just Tom or Peter or even Socrates. We can internalize this, and this becomes something that, can help us, as a touchstone as we try to get into our future better self. And so ritual also gives our capacity for us to internalize sort of a transpersonal spirit that can act as sort of an enhancement of our conscience and our attempts to cultivate our character. And so that would also make this a powerful function of ritual. See, there's just so much going on.
Yeah, and like in that, like there's like the people, right? But then there's the place.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
think like at like what we talk about, I'm like, the place that we are is part of the facilitation team.
That's an excellent point. The place enters into that spirit. It's not just the spirit of others, because you've turned space into place, and place means a space that has a presence to you and a power to you. So you're exactly right. It's not just the spirit of the collective. It's the spirit of the collective in place, embedded, and that spirit on all of that is woven together. And that's, you think about it. Think about how in episodic memory, sometimes it can be powerfully triggered and you feel like you're in a place, like because of the way I was brought up, when I smell candles, I'm in church at Christmas time when I'm a little boy.
Yeah. And that I'm in that place. Like, and like, that's like the feeling we have, like when we enter our home, like, oh, I'm home. Like, oof, and that familiarity and that power, that entity. And I think like that's like my wondering about like where are we when we're on a Zoom call? Like what is, like, am I in my space and you're in your space? So we're not in a shared space, but we're sharing this.
Well, we're in a space. So here's a proposal of what the space we're in, and you're doing it. When you're at the campfire, you tell stories. Where are you in story space?
Yeah. I'm in like,
you're in a shared virtual reality. We were doing virtual reality way before we had this technology. It's called stories and narrative, and we tell a story together, and we create a shared virtual space. And I think we tap into the storytelling, right? The story space when we're in virtual world, and we tap into the campfire. Look at how our faces are lit, are light, are right. They're well lit and they're very present, right? But right, in a disembodied way that is subject to all kinds of manipulation by forces that do not have our best self-interest at heart. So they tap into a tremendous evolutionary power, story space, campfire space, and therefore they can be powerfully used for virtue, but because they're disembodied and disconnected, right, from evolutionary constraints, they can be hijacked for malevolent purposes.
Yeah, and that kind of touches on this like potentially other direction that I want to go. And so we've been talking about like the power, like, whoa, like this is like incredibly important, like doing these practices in a place with people, the way that it's entered, the way that it's left. Like, I really just want to like, boom, like that is like incredibly important and like not a small thing. And so then that kind of brings up like this other question, which touches on the evolution of evolvability, is like, what are the potential impacts of this like disembedment, like that are accidental? So you talked about like the fire was this kind of accidental evolutionary thing that created this like hypnosis, and there's all these benefits, potentially all these drawbacks. And so when I look at, I think it's like Daniel Lieberman, Harvard professor of anthropology, talks about like some of the like poor adaptive things we've created are like books. So like one of the drawbacks of books is myopia.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
One of the drawbacks of chairs is like sitting is the number one activity for all humans in the Western world. You will sit more than you will do anything else in your life. And that creates like a chair shaped body, right? We're adapting and shoes and beds. So we have these amazing things that also have these like maladaptations that we're like, whoa, maybe we should design better shoes and better chairs and better things. And I'm seeing like the Zoom or like the internet, like the digital face to face having all of this connectability. And I'm still like, what are we not seeing? Like, how are we adapting? How are we maladapting in important ways that we're actually not considering? Because of convenience, and convenience being like the slippery slope to like.
Yep. The smooth slope that allows us to slide. Yes.
So yeah, I'm curious, like, what are the potential maladaptions of embracing the convenience of this technology?
Well, there's a lot to be said for that, and so I think this is very important. There's a lot of ignorance, and it is inevitable that there's all kinds of maladaptation. I mean, part of wisdom is to fine tune how I can get the most out of the adaptive benefits while ramping down as much as I can, because they're in a trade-off relationship, right? If I grab the benefits, the negatives come along, and I try. How can I sort of finesse so I get more of the benefits and less of the negative effects? That's part of what wisdom is, and I think there's more and more people are starting to think about wise relationship to the virtual space, but it's still being drowned out by all the way in which we're being bullshitted. Where what I mean by that technically is salience is being enhanced in order to take us away from pursuing what is true or what is good or what is beautiful, and instead into enhancing us to purchasing and consuming various products or ideas that are to other people's benefits, not ours. So I think, first of all, I just wanted to say that to amplify the problem you posed. I think it's a very important problem. These states, let's use an analogy. So psychedelic states are not positive or negative. They're states of, and mystical states are too, they're states of epistemic vulnerability. You've sort of broken frame and you're open to the possibility of making a new frame. But if you just leave that to chance, it can go off in all kinds of things. So people will often go into weird rabbit holes after they've had a psychedelic experience or a mystical experience. And so one of the things that helps give people, right, helps guide people so they make a good frame is you have a philosophical framework, you have a cultural framework, and you have biological constraints. And the problem about the virtual world is it doesn't really present all those constraints very strongly. There's we're sort of both using English, and there's sort of a mild North American thing going on. But, we're not in the same environment, and that has an impact, right? That has a deep impact. We're not sharing the same constraints in a deeply environmental way. And so the degree in which you and I can share a constraining framework in a state of epistemic vulnerability is significantly reduced. Now, I think we can do a lot based on scientific knowledge. That's what we try to do at the VF, the Vervaeke Foundation. Is like, well, how can we build up a really good philosophical framework philosophical scientific framework, so that epistemic vulnerability breaks frame in a way that really conduces it to good frame making, really wisdom cultivating frame making. But I do think that the degree to which people are disembedded, thrown into the virtual world, not given a philosophical framework, removed from embeddedness, removed from biological constraints on their cognition, and then subject to tsunamis of bullshit, means that this thing we're on right now is an accelerant of the meaning crisis in a powerful way. So there's two, I think, important moral responses. One is to do what I'm trying to do, which is to make the virtual as virtuous as possible. And two, doing what you are doing, which is offering people a non-virtual return to the really real versions of these dialogical practices.
Yeah, and if I insert that into the ecology, I'm like, there almost has to be, I mean, this is like a poor way of explaining it, but I'll just do it because that's what's coming up, is it's like, well, for every 50 Zoom calls that you've done in a dialogical sense, like you should have at least like one in person or, like something like that. Like, how do we actually like really like you would say, like, if you're meditating, you should be contemplating. If you're, like we want to find those
the point of processing. And I think I think, Kyle, I would put that down to, we want to make that as empirical a question as possible. What would be the optimal ratio between virtual and in person, such that the enhancement that's happening in person, in place, let's use both of those, in person, in place, right, transfers reliably to the virtual practice or the individual urban setted practice. I think that could be worked out. Presumably, you don't have to, do a Kyle Koch retreat every day, but presumably once a year might not be enough. And I think it's an empirical question we could ask, like, what's the ratio that would optimally afford transfer for people from doing it in person and in place to doing it virtually or doing it only on their own, etc.
Yeah, and hearing that, I have like my phenomenological experience, and then I wonder if it connects to what you said about memory. Is like I have this experience with people in a place that is like extremely connective and opening. It builds these rich bonds, and then when we do like regular Zoom calls with the retreat participants, and then when they all come on my screen, that like feeling comes up in me.
Yep.
I'm like, your face, like, and then I remember we did that thing, and so that like is like, that's kind of that like opening. And I don't know what it's like in reverse or how reversible it is. So that's like a question that I have, but I know.
Well, I mean, that's that, but we're going to sort of do that. The reverse question is how much, and you were actually seeking it. How much does the online training that Jake got, for example, transfer into the in-person and in place and enhance the in-person and in place? And I think there's good reason to believe that. And so we have a possibility of a mutually affording loop. You get this, like the advantages of the virtual is we can do it regularly. We can get a lot of practice. We can get a lot of skill development, perspective forming, character building. And then we transfer that in, but then we get the in-person and in place, like you're doing, the opening, the enhancement, creating that episodic reliving, not just semantic remembering. And we can relive the in-person and in place when we're virtual. And I think there's a real capacity for them to mutually afford and mutually enhance each other. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really been like the like holding, because like as somebody who like I live off grid, I like practice primitive skills or Paleolithic skills, like in all of these things, which there's like some other tangents I don't know if we'll get to. Yeah, like I don't, and I've been in IT, like I don't want to go back, right? Mm-hmm. Like in time, like I love the time that we're in, but I will really want to be aware of how we're moving forward. And then really that the evolution of evolvability, like that, like in some ways it needs to be at like the forefront. And I mean, there's always the unseen, the unknown that we can never like calculate, but it's like that wisdom that we have gained from the past, like being like, okay, like we've seen what happens with books and chairs and shoes, and now we have this accelerant technology of Zoom. And I think we need to be like really aware of that balance. And like, there's almost like I feel like I'm in the other camp. I'm like, people, like you have to go outside. It is like so important. And as I was talking with my friend, he was reminding me of it's not a direct quote from Nietzsche, but it's kind of a conglomerate, but that like is something along the lines of like, don't trust a thought that was born in a room without windows, and don't trust a philosophy that wasn't born walking.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very good. Let's open up that term. which I've been using and you use, but not everybody might not be familiar with that phrase, the evolution of evolvability. Let me just do a quick thing on that. Biological theory has been sort of focused for a very long time on the evolution of traits. So the evolution of, a specific trait, like, maybe a dexterous hand or something like that. But what people are now talking about is, but there's another thing you can evolve. You can evolve your ability to evolve. That's your evolvability. You can actually evolve your evolvability. And why that might be beneficial is if you've got a very turbulent environment, a very volatile environment, one that's got a lot of uncertainty and dynamic change in it. You don't want to lock in necessarily long-term to specific traits. You want to have the ability to come up with new traits very quickly and then abandon them very quickly and get new traits. And so species that have high evolvability, which of course is one of the advantages of microbes, they have super high evolvability, and this is why we can't defeat them very readily. That gives you a tremendous capacity to deal with an environment that is increasingly filled with uncertainty and dynamic change, which is what the high-tech virtual world is. So we need to move not to evolving traits, but evolving evolvability. What does that mean concretely? It means we shift focusing on the products of our cognition, that would be like our traits, and we focus on the processes of our cognition and enhancing them. We get off about, I want people to have these beliefs when they're done, into I want to make people capable of evolving their optimal grip in an ongoing flowing fashion. It's much more sort of Taoist or Zen approach. And I think the way you and I are talking about this and the way we try to situate it, we don't situate this in any kind of evangelical, and I mean that broadly, context. We're not trying to push a particular religious view. Neither are we excluding a particular religious view. What we want is, religious or not, we want people to tap into the power of these machineries to enhance their capacity to evolve how they are oriented in the world, how they can navigate a complex, dynamically changing world. And interestingly enough, getting out of that world. So this is one last thing. Give me 5 more minutes. Think about story. What do we like about story? Well, this is Tolkien. We go into the virtual world and we cultivate some stuff, and then we come back because we've had to put on new glasses in that world, and we come back and see our world differently and anew. Actually stepping away from the virtual world and stepping back into the evolutionary world of in-person and in-place allows us to deeply transform and train the skills and sensibilities and character traits, right? And we get, this is how I can transform. We get that sense of evolving our evolvability, and we bring that into this virtual environment. Sorry, that was a long way, but I wanted long detour, but I wanted to be very clear about what you're meaning, what I take you to be meaning when you're talking about the evolution of evolvability, and why that is what is most needed right now in the high-tech social media, virtual AI, increasingly AI-infused realm.
Yeah, I wonder if this is another way of saying it. It's like we are aware that it goes back to the beginning. It's like we are now much more aware of how our environment is shaping us.
Yes.
And in that awareness, we have the opportunity, we have choice. So it's like from a movement metaphor, like the Batek people, they climb trees, so they've evolved highly mobile ankles, right? In the Baju in Southeast Asia, they spend hours and hours underwater fishing. And so they've evolved an enhanced spleen, so they can hold their breath for like 5 minutes. And then we talked about fire is giving us this like capacity for like hypnosis and mindfulness. And so like I'm holding that question of like, how is spending this time, how is it both shaping our bodies? Like I'm sitting, my hip flexors are shortening in order to evolve better sitting capacity. And then I'm also now expanding that. Like, how is that adapting or shaping our minds? And how is that shaping our thoughts? Like, how does a thought, and going back to Nietzsche, like, how does a thought get shaped in a room without windows? And how does a thought get shaped in the world? And then I'm like, looking back at like Socrates, and I'm like, I wonder what his environment was like, that and how that shaped his thinking. And like in all of those, yeah.
And Rafe brings this up. He's of course doing a lot of martial arts, and he's also a stonemason. So he's very physically active, and he's very much embodied and engaged. He's walking around a lot. Not always at the symposium. They're sitting down and eating and drinking, but they walk.
Sometimes he's standing still for just hours.
48 hours. Yeah. And he's often traveling to or from ritual locations. And this is having a huge impact on his ability to get insight. The word theoria, where we get our word theory from, but originally means how we envision things. So there's another one. Comes from the idea of traveling to see a new ritual occasion. So right? Because the idea is when I travel, and it's not just sort of wandering, which can also be beneficial, by the way, but when I travel with the intent of like a quest where I'm going to end my travel by putting myself into sacred time and sacred space, this opens me up and allows me to envision. And this is why we have pilgrimages. And this is why I'm going to do the pilgrimage of the philosophical Silk Road. And one way of framing everything we've just said is your retreats could properly be understood as a kind of pilgrimage where people are traveling. And remember, you tell you how they enter the space, how they move around in the space, how they move through the day, right? These are importantly needed to enhance our envisioning. Here's the other thing I want to say, right? The deepest development happens in a play situation, a serious play situation, not a work situation, right? And the problem with a lot of the problem also with the virtual world is the bleed between, like, everything is being sort of slowly co-opted into work, or the opposite of work, which is not play, which is this relaxation, zoning out, right? Which of course sometimes you need, but the point is, what you have to set aside a sacred time and a sacred place. You have to do what's called safety framing. You have to give people a well-structured frame so that they know that they can seriously play within it. Think about what you have to do to make therapy work, how you have to really get the rapport set up. So, right, you can think of this again, we have to get people to pilgrimage out of their sedentary, high-tech virtual world. And we need to set up a place that is particularly framed for serious play, because that's where the greatest development can occur.
Yeah, I think that's like, and I think what you said too with like within the virtual world is like one of my teachers says, like, as soon as you like sign up for a vision quest, like that's when it starts. Right. And so it's like when you sign up for a retreat or like, you even setting a date with like your romantic partner, there's like evidence to show that there's like a hormonal increase over that time. Yep. So it's like
anticipatory relevance realization. You better believe it's the guts of your cognition and your agency. You better believe it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that almost feels like such a good place to kind of like pause. Like, I feel like we've arrived. For me, I'm just like, these things that are like important to me and the experience of the, what do I want to say? The like power of the experiences that I'm having with other people is like, I'm just like almost like at an aporic level. Like I'm at the edge of like, I don't know. I'm not sure where to go from there. I've regrounded my experience in like a deeper reality. And then like the importance of it is like skyrocketing like even more.
Yeah. That's great. I know what you mean. Since I chose to undertake the philosophical Silk Road, I've been going through this powerful psycho-spiritual process of purgation and preparation and sort of cultivating a receptivity. I don't even have the right words to it, but yeah, it's having a huge impact on me. So that's something we should think about too, giving people a pilgrimage that they can foresee. What you just said, that will also put them through a transformative process as they anticipate and make more salient the possibilities that the pilgrimage to the retreat is going to bring them. I think that's a very good point, Kyle. I hadn't thought about that, but that's excellent. Thank you for that.
Yeah, there's like that prep work. Like even when we like booked this little dialogue, I was like, it like shifted my conversations, knowing that I'm going to have this conversation. It just like, it started changing my salience landscaping. Like, ooh, like I'm like having I'm having a conversation with somebody who's like really important to me and like wanting to like be like articulate and like change the way that I'm like listening to podcasts or reading books or like how I'm like taking in information. I mean, some of it's like that, like it's like a biasness towards like supporting evidence, but at the same time, I'm in dialogue with people who are like questioning me and refuting me and like expanding me. And a lot of the things that I talked about today were like direct results of those conversations.
Yeah, so I think this is an added dimension. I want to put this down. I just want to make a note about this because, preparation for a ritual and pilgrimage. This is a very that's very important. Thank you, Kyle. I mean, you've said a lot of good things, but that, like you said, you paused for a good reason. That's a very juicy realization. So that's interesting because, right, you're sort of proactively starting to do reconstructive memory change, right, in order to prepare so that you can be as deeply receptive to the ritual as you possibly can. And then that also enhances your capacity, right, as you go forward in foresight. And then once you've had it, that enhances your capacity to go back retrospectively and relive it and transfer it to the non-ritual context. Because ultimately, that's what has to happen. Rituals only matter to the degree to which they transfer broadly and deeply into many domains in your life and transform broadly and deeply many layers of your psyche. But that's an added dimension that can really enhance this. This has been really, really rich. Like so many things about this have been really, really, really wonderful. I'm glad we had this conversation. I knew I would be, but I didn't know how I would be.
Me too. I'm just like, oh, this is what I love. I have all these like, questions and experiences and just like your like depth of experience and the way that you've been exploring these spaces in the past and in the present and doing your best to like weave them together in a sense making story, right? That it could, so many of those things have been siloed and often aren't talking to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And through that opponent processing and that dialogical like process, I've seen so much of your perspectives as like emergent, like the third thing, right? It's like, oh, there's these two things. When we put them together, like a new thing emerges. And if that kind of like keeps happening and we're always trying to point at the thing until once we point at it, then it's like, then we have to find the next thing. And so I like really just appreciate, the journey that you've been on. And I really think it is like, a humility that you have on this pilgrimage, that there's like a willingness to put yourself out there and a willingness to go on a journey, not knowing where you're going to end up or if you'll even end up anywhere, but that like I think, I don't know if you said it in like After Socrates, but you're like, I'm just going to put this out there. It's not complete. It's not refined. It's not like the best possible thing that it could be. And it never will be that. But it's important that I just start the journal.
Yep. That was After Socrates. So thank you for that. We're coming to the end, but I want to ask you one more question, if that's possible. So I'm interested. I imagine that many of these people might not come from organized religious backgrounds, that many of them are nuns in the Nones sense. But I'm wondering, because I also was watching this when I was at Return to the Source, how many of the people start using spiritual and or religious language or concepts in order to articulate what's happening to them? Like, do spiritual and religious language, metaphors, gestures start to come up as people start to be impacted by this and transformed? What kind of I imagine that some of it's phenomenological language, but and some of it may be scientific if some of them have a background. But I have a sneaking suspicion that many of them start to use more religious and or spiritual metaphors or symbols. I know this is only anecdotal, but it's still relevant observation. What do you say to that? Am I like? How do people talk about it afterwards? What kind of language do they use to talk about it once they're into the flow of transformation?
Yeah, I feel so alive. I feel so connected. This is like, I think and this is kind of coming from you, but it's like, I didn't even know this thing could exist. I didn't know I could feel this way or like have such deep connection with complete strangers. I feel like so much more in my body. We have people in their mid to late 60s who are like, I haven't laughed or played like this in 25 years.
Yeah.
And so there's like that, like profoundness of expression, like connectivity, excitement, aliveness.
So religio, lots of religio, aliveness and connectivity, deep connection. Religio is enhanced. Excellent to hear that. Also, do people get a sense of like of something collective that's beyond just each one of them individually, like the we space or the third presence or anything like that? Do people ever talk about that? They get a sense of something more going on beyond just them as individuals?
Yeah. And that's like one of the challenges is as like people leave these experiences, it's like that's not present in their other, even though they might have connective relationships with other humans in their life. There's something about that like we space that doesn't happen regularly in our like modern world. So it's like, it's almost like you said, it's hard to talk about. There's like, that's how like Aaron and I explained it. It's like, like this thing. It's like, like that.
Yeah,
I don't know what that is, but that.
Yeah. And so that's interesting because that's very important to note, because to some degree that does disconfirm what I was saying. Although people do have a sense of the we space, and they know that they don't have the language to talk about it. You were just doing that. It's that you're doing gesture and purely demonstrative reference. You're just pointing at it because you can't actually grab it with a concept. That's interesting. So I was wondering if people ever just started talking about the we space as a particular spirit or presence, or if they feel that they're being led or guided in any way.
Yeah, it's hard to say, like, because
maybe they don't. This is an open question. Don't force your memory. I just want to know.
Yeah, like I don't have like particular, like, I don't think that people talk about it openly. It's almost like, for me, it's a feeling. It's a feeling in a group that I experience, and it doesn't happen until like day 3.
Right. Say more about that.
Well, that was like one of the questions that I had for you in like, as we like are putting together this experience, is like, what is the optimal time? Like, I know that 3 days in nature increases your natural killer cell count by like, some ridiculous percentage. And I'm like, well, how many days of being embedded in an experience, or, what are the criteria needed to create that intangible kind of electromagnetic field of connection, of like attunement. Like that's how I describe it, is like the place and the people and the fields, they're all attuned in a way that is like palpable.
Yeah. Okay. So that's spiritual language, attunement, attunement and at one-ment and religio. So that's coming in there. As to your question, I don't know. That's a very good empirical question, right? It's probably, I don't know what it is. I mean, there's going to be confounds because it depends where people are traveling from. They might have jet lag and that might impede how long, right? Right. So, but that's good. That's a, like if it to your observation, if it's sort of on average around 3 days, I wonder if that has to do with circadian rhythms. I wonder if that has to do with sort of a lot of implicit risk assessment and that sort of hypervigilance calming down enough so that people can start to get into that safety framing. I don't know. That's a great question. I'm just
And one thing I'll add to that is actually like, so here's like a variable. Like we typically have like 50% of our students are returning students.
oh
And the more that happens, the milieu is like allows people to drop into that culture and they're welcomed in to that culture more than like, if it's all new students, there's more attuning, there's more, creating collectively that's happening.
I think that's something, and I think that's something to make prescriptive, which is try to get, a certain percentage, maybe set a minimum threshold of, try to get at least 20 or 30% of the people participating to be returning people. I mean, sometimes you can't do that because the world doesn't cooperate. But it may be even something like offering some kind of, discount or rebate or incentive to people to return.
Totally.
Because I think that also is a great observation. So I want to thank you, Kyle, for this. This has been truly wonderful. Of course, we're going to continue the discussion ongoing. It's very loose right now. It's looking probably like this will happen maybe next year, but maybe not. There might be a possibility for later this year. And Chris and Kyle and I are still trying to figure out what can be done logistically and in terms of resources. Like I say, the VF is spread very thin right now, and we're collecting all the resources. We definitely want to make this happen and study it, and help incubate you doing it, and maybe get a link between you and the Awakening to Meaning that Taylor is and Chris are running. So you can have people who are doing these dialogical practices go to the retreat and vice versa. All of this is, I think, very doable, and we're going to make it happen. It would be helpful for those of you who might be interested significantly in doing this if you just left a comment on this video about your potential interest. You're not making any commitment, but don't just do it. Don't do it frivolously. Like, do it seriously. You're not signing a contract with the devil or anything, but do it seriously. If you'd be interested in doing this, because it'd be good for us to know and help us get an idea, and we can wrap that into the planning. So, Kyle, I just want to give you the last word, as I always do for all of my guests, but I really want to thank you for doing this. This has been wonderfully productive. We got the logos definitely showed up, and a lot of really great articulation and integration of work and reflection on ritual, and, being in place and in person and embedded. This has been wonderful. So thank you so much. So generative.
Yeah, I'll say 3 things. If you want to be involved, definitely leave a comment. Number 2 is I am hosting what I'm calling embedded experiences throughout the summer. I'm doing 4 of them. They're way lower commitment. They're a Friday night to a Sunday, like 4 p.m. And they're happening in San Francisco, Boulder, Joshua Tree, and here on this beautiful mountain.
And we'll make sure all the links for that are put in the notes for this video. Yep.
And just an opportunity to kind of weave those practices of embodiment embedded in a place with people who are interested in cultivating their character. And yeah, the kind of like closing words is like, I would encourage people to really ask the question, like, how is your environment shaping you? How is it shaping your body? How is it shaping your thought? And yeah, just to really like consider that, and always like, the world is waiting for you outside of your door. Like, you have a minute, you have 5 minutes, like the encouragement to go outside of the walls and like really just like feast on the world that is like around us at all times. And yeah, and thank you, John, for all the work and opportunity you've provided.
Well, thank you, Kyle. And that was beautifully well said. I mean, I really, I'm glad we got a chance to hang out together. Like I say, we'll be in touch. Please, people, consider doing a retreat, even these, low scale, less intense retreat that Kyle's running through the summer. I think this is a golden opportunity. I encourage you strongly to keep following his work in general and to look forward to how Kyle and the Vervaeke Foundation will be doing some work together to try and bring some of this to life and to fruition for all of you. Thank you very much, everyone.